Good morning. Those of you who have not joined the Pear Deck, please do that. And there's also a link in the chat, or you can go to joinpd.com and type in this password that you see on the shared screen. I'll give you another 30 seconds, maybe, before we move on. And for those of you not familiar with Pear Deck is a Google Slides add-on that I will be using today just to demonstrate how it works and how it's interactive. So if you're interested, you can go later on and explore Google Slides add-ons. So welcome. Heather, I see you just joined us. There's a link in chat if you want to join the Pear Deck so that you can join us in the interaction. So today, or this morning, we will be talking about Hyperdocs for adult learners. So thank you for joining bright and early. My name is Stephanie. I'm an associate professor at Aquinas College in Grand Rapids. I'm a certified trainer for Google. I'm also an ISTE certified educator. My K-12 teaching experience was in Southern California at the junior high level. So as I continue, please add where you're from and what your role is in the chat, just so we know who's here this morning. So this session, we'll be looking at Hyperdocs, specifically how we can support adult learners. So looking at professional development or PLCs, for example. The Hyperdoc model was designed by Lisa Highfill, Kelly Hilton, and Sarah Landis. All of you will have or you already do have access to this slide deck, but there's plenty of resources at the end to further explore Hyperdocs after this session. And just in general, if you have any questions, please feel free to add them into the chat or turn your audio on. I'm very open to interacting and talking about anything that is brought up. So welcome again. As well, this supports the ISTE standards for teachers under the learner, designer, and facilitator domain. So if you are interested in understanding how Hyperdocs support those are the three main areas that Hyperdocs in general, and specifically looking at it for adults, is supported here. We're going to start by using Google Trends. So if you look at Google, we'll look in a second at Google Trends, but on your Pear Deck, depending on if you're using your computer or maybe a device, a tablet, it should say answer question. So if you're not familiar with using Pear Deck, you should be able to have a tab that says answer question. And I'm curious to know if you think Pear Deck or Nearpod have been searched more often in the last year at the international level. And then we'll look at the answer. So if you have no idea, if this is your first time being exposed to Pear Deck or even hearing about Nearpod, just make a random guess to kind of entertain us this morning.
And so Stephanie, there's no like submit button. We just click the button.
Right.
Okay.
And from your view, it should have a little check at the bottom to tell you that your answer has been submitted. Again, those of you who have just joined, we're using Pear Deck to make this interactive. So the link is in the chat session, or go to Join PD and put this code up here in the top right into that website. So here are the responses. So 3 of you thought Nearpod. Oh, we're tied 3-3. And here's the response. So I'm on Google Trends. This is just a fun way to use Google Trends just to compare content or topics. So you can see, I won't spend too much time here, but you can look and see where these topics are being searched. My guess is Nearpod has had more training. So on those days, different countries, the participants are probably searching it and trying to understand it better. So just a fun tool to use going forward. All right, so Hyperdocs. Hyperdocs focus on how we can redefine digital learning environments. They should help transform your learning environment, and they are student-driven. They are definitely different than multimedia text sets. different than WebQuest and not just a digital worksheet. So we'll be exploring those today and the different steps related to that. So why Hyperdocs for adults? So the Hyperdoc model was originally set up for K-12 students or learning, but as a professor and teacher educator, I found that using Hyperdocs has really supported adult learning as well. So a few things that relate to adult learning is the relevancy, the convenience, having exploratory methods, and the immediacy of it. As well, using it helps, especially teacher educators, model. I model it for them and they can go transfer it directly into the K-12 classroom. But Hyperdocs also work well for any type of professional development, professional learning communities, one-on-one peer collaboration, coaching, mentorships. It could go on and on. So those are just a few different ways that Hyperdocs can support adult learners. So here's another interactive slide. As an adult learner, how do you learn? So I'll give you a moment to respond to that via Pear Deck. So those of you, again, who aren't familiar with Pear Deck, you can see from my view, it's live and updating as people finish their responses. So some people like lectures, some people like to read. So as adults, we all have different ways that we engage with the content. And as we're finishing up with people adding to this, just another tip for Pear Deck, you can save all the responses and look at them later if you're curious about how that works at the end as the presenter. All right, so let's just quickly look at the basic elements of Hyperdocs. So I mentioned they're not just online worksheets. Those of you who engaged with WebQuest back when those were innovative, maybe 15 years ago, those two were very similar to kind of a digital worksheet. Now Hyperdocs are set up to focus on kind of that 5E model, but really get the learner or the student to apply and to create, interact, and reflect. Those are some big pieces that take it beyond a simple list of information or a call and response type worksheet. So the basic elements of the Hyperdoc is really to transform that learning environment for the students. So here are some examples. These are examples that I have used for undergraduate and graduate students who are going to be educators. Some of them are in-service educators, as well as a general education writing course at the college I teach at. So I've pulled out these examples just to give you some ideas of how they might work for adults. So this first one, if I use Hyperdocs in any of my courses, I make sure that the students truly understand what a Hyperdoc is. I don't just go and throw it at them. It's almost like I'm scaffolding but modeling at the same time. So I make sure that they are understanding the Hyperdoc model and where it's coming from so that they can truly use it themselves in their own design in the future. You can use it in a document or you can use it as a slide deck. Some people in the Hyperdoc world call these ones hyperdecks. Just, you know, how social media goes with some of the naming of things. You can have students interact and support UDL on all levels, all the principles of UDL, if that's one of your focus areas. And they can directly link creations into the slide deck, or you can have them link out. There's definitely plenty, endless platforms, as I'm sure you can learn today throughout all the different sessions, the tools that you can use to explore and expose through Hyperdocs. Here's an example of scaffolding for the a writing course that I worked with. So adults also benefit from scaffolding. Sometimes we forget that, right? So Hyperdocs can be there to support and scaffold your students for larger, more summative assessments. You can utilize various platforms. So for example, oftentimes when I use slide decks, I have the students sometimes respond directly in the speaker notes. And when you access the slide deck, there's an example of that that I've used, and people interact directly in the slide deck when they make their own copy for their own notes. You can also embed a variety of tools. I mentioned this briefly, but you can explore and expose, especially those of you who work with teachers. What I like to do is kind of sprinkle in different tools for them to really understand what's out there and to figure out what works best for their content area and their age level, because a QR code in preschool is not going to be as effective as using a QR code in high school, but just knowing that it's out there is something that I like to do with my Hyperdoc design for them. As well, one thing to consider is there are plenty of options for using strategies offline. So for example, for this Hyperdoc, I had them practice Cornell notes, and they had to take an image and insert that. You can also support all learners by printing out Hyperdocs. So if anyone wants a physical copy, sometimes, at any level, that's a beneficial tool as well, whether it's a slide deck or just a regular document. So there's definitely, almost endless ways to support all your learners at all levels. And then one more example or thing to consider is, how we model. Definitely Hyperdocs in general are more formative assessments, but they should lead to more a summative assessment. So depending on who you're guiding and what your goal is, there's a variety of ways that you can model and incorporate these examples in your Hyperdocs. And then this is one last one. In general, I found most adults prefer a slide deck version in comparison to the just using one long Google document. Most of the reasons that they say they like the slide deck format is it's definitely more segmented, or they can chunk. They don't feel overwhelmed with all the content at once, even though it's all there on the left side from their view, but they also can skip around, and it makes it a little bit more manageable if they're working on it over time, to move around. If you're familiar with Docs or Google Slides, you can cross-connect the slides to make it much more manageable in terms of how they move around and access each of the areas. So I just talked for a long time. And I still have more, but I want to take a moment to see if there's any questions at this time. Either add it in chat or feel free to just take your voice off or your audio off. Nope. All right then.
I have a question. Can you help me with the connection? And I was a little distracted as things were getting going, but can you help me with distinguish between Pear Deck and Hyperdocs? Is Hyperdocs like a format, a way of putting things together? It's not like it isn't centralized in an app, right?
No, and they're completely separate pieces. There's really no connection. I'm just using Pear Deck to present my information to make it interactive. You possibly could create a Pear Deck and have an asynchronous Hyperdoc if you wanted to get real fancy. But I'm just using that as a tool and to model how you could have an interactive slide deck. Usually Hyperdocs are asynchronous. Students are working on it on their own time. If for those, especially in a K-12 setting, once you've scaffolded and allowed your students to fully take charge of using Hyperdocs, it allows for the teacher to do more one-on-one time, small groups, those other pieces, interventions, for example, while students work their way through a Hyperdoc in the K-12 setting in a traditional classroom. Does that help clarify?
Yes, brilliant. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or needed clarifications? All right, then we will move on. So just a few tips about Hyperdocs in general, not necessarily for adults, but for all learners. So I'm not going to read all of this to you. You have access to it, but this over here on the right where it talks about redefinition, for those of you familiar with the SAMR model of technology integration, when Hyperdocs are designed effectively, they should fit into the redefinition or transformative level of technology use. So there's some pieces that break it down for you here. I've also, in the actual slide deck that you have access to, there's a few links that support and explain SAMR or the SAMR model for adults or in higher ed. So those are some pieces for you to look at. And then a few points I wanted to make in terms of differentiation. So for adults and our K-12 learners, Hyperdocs can differentiate through you can create different versions, for example, and the different versions might support various learners based off of their tech skills, or for example, how I mentioned printing it out, you could support some of your learners who prefer to have physical documents to possibly write or at least read from. You can change the aesthetics based off of learner needs. It's great for ELL learners, especially if you're familiar with using Chrome extensions. There's well, even add-ons, but those, if that's not something you're familiar with, you might want to mark that down and look into Chrome extensions and add-ons. There are plenty of those to support all of your learners through the use of Hyperdocs. So that one example might be having a Chrome extension that reads the content to your learner. That's one example that can be supported or that can help support our diverse learners. You can also do it as a whole class. You can incorporate direct instruction as needed. You can do it in small groups. You can advance or make a version for, you can create a version, excuse me, for advanced learners. And then, for example, the sounds, you can modify those similar to what I was mentioning from in regards to the Chrome extension. There are plenty of tools to help with the audio interpretation as well. So we're going to collaborate together. We'll see how this works. I know there's not too many. I was just going off of a guess of how we might be able to split it, but I have two links here. One is through Google Drawings and one is through Google Jamboard. And again, just to expose you to different platforms. But if your last name is A through M, I'm going to ask you to click and collaborate through the drawings board. And if your last name is N through Z, I'm going to ask you to collaborate with the Jamboard. And on those, they have the same prompt. But the prompt says, what are Hyperdocs? Draw, express, create your understanding in this collaborative space. So we'll take a few minutes, and you could just add images, you can add ideas, thoughts, whatever you'd like to collaborate together, and then we'll look at each other's tools. I'm trying to look at your names across the board. I don't see last names, but if there's not too many, if they're all kind of on one platform, you can go try both, especially if you've never been exposed to those tools. I'll give you a few moments for that. Nobody in here is N to Z. If anyone wants to hop over and test out Jamboard, go for it. If you've never tried Jamboard.
All right, I'm switching teams.
Great, I like this connection to SMART goals. Great connection, thank you for that. Work in progress, yes. I like the visual of this kind of Venn diagram, mind map, not Venn diagram, excuse me, mind map. Interactive lessons, great. So those two tools are, again, if you have not been exposed to them before, ways to interact and collaborate online. I find that Google Drawings is a little bit more beneficial for when you want detailed text and you want to personalize it. But Jamboard is nice for kind of quick, last minute. You can only do the post-its. You can't do much playing around with what it's going to look like. So if that's your goal, then Jamboard is cool too. These two tools obviously can work outside of Hyperdocs. I'm just using them today to expose you to some new tools and how you might collaborate in there. Does anyone have a thought about the difference between Jamboard and drawings now that I see some of you have popped in from both that you'd like to share with us? Or maybe your own experience of using Jamboard or Google Drawings in your own courses? Nope. All right, then we can move on. I did add another note down here. Again, just exposing you to some possibilities of how you might use creation or support creation in Hyperdocs with adults. But Adobe Spark has some really cool free tools that you could use, especially that would support yourself creating a Hyperdoc or for people to demonstrate their application of knowledge from the Hyperdoc. So for example, the Spark collage, you could request or have them make graphics. There's Spark videos, and then there's also web pages that you can use to support your learners or your own Hyperdoc design. All right, we have one more Pear Deck interaction. So this question, there's two questions. How can you utilize Hyperdocs in your role? And how will adults benefit from this tool as a learner and an educator? So if you could take a moment or two to write your response to these two questions, especially the first one. This might help some of the other people who are participating to think about new ideas of using Hyperdocs in their role. Great, building quality project-based learning. Yes, so this definitely supports project-based learning, design thinking, computational thinking. There's definitely a lot of different frameworks that can be supported through simply the correct design of Hyperdocs. Asynchronous, great. Yes, students who are more quiet. So those Flipgrid is a great way to get people to interact via Hyperdocs, even at the higher ed adult level. If you require that that's their interaction, that really helps. And sometimes being able to cover their face in Flipgrid is a great tool to really engage those quiet speakers or people who are a little bit more reluctant to speak in the class. Designing online coursework with a variety of ways for mastery, some more asynchronous assignments. Great. I like the bite-sized chunking. All right. So here is the last part of the Hyperdoc. As mentioned, or as shown earlier, it starts with engaging, moves through explaining and creation or application, and then towards the end, it should have extension. So on your own, you know, after today's conference, there's all these different resources. Of course, there's always Google, and you can Google Hyperdocs, but these are some really good resources just to get you started and give you ideas. As well, social media, Facebook and Twitter, there's a really great supportive Hyperdoc community, and everyone in the Hyperdoc community shares resources for free. You on the Facebook group, for example, people are always asking for specific Hyperdocs to see if somebody already created something, and then you can give them credit and recreate. And this is happening from K to higher ed as well. So these are some tools, especially this Live Binder resource tool. This has some really good examples in there for you to explore on your own when you're ready. So we're going to take a minute and play GimKit. Again, I like to expose people to new tools. So if you haven't used GimKit, or possibly some people might pronounce it Gymkit, we're going to play it. So you can link out directly from where it says GimKit, and I'm going to continue over here, and here's your code. So we're just going to do it for fun. If you haven't played this one before, you get to risk your money that they give you. So obviously this is more enjoyable for K-12, but it is enjoyable to see how sometimes adult learners enjoy these types of games as well. All right, so Heather's joined us.
I'm looking for the code.
It should be on this screen. I just switched. Is that what you're, it's 18231?
Okay.
Are you not seeing that screen?
Not at the minute, not at the moment, but that worked for me. Thank you.
Okay. All right, are you ready? I love when there's no feedback when I ask questions, but yeah, I'll take that, your silence as a yes. All right, good luck. Heather's taking the early lead. Oh, Wendy's in front now. You probably didn't know you were going to be gambling this morning, entering this.
Yeah, I'm ready to shop.
You're already what?
I said, I'm ready to shop. I have $107.
Well, so if anyone wants to, even though I know some of you, it sounded like a couple of you might know each other, but you can also ice people. So that means they're frozen for a set amount of time. I think you have to use your money for that, but. Nobody wants to ice anyone? Heather's still in the lead. Somebody should ice Heather. I'm just kidding, Heather. Wendy, you said your hands are full. Do you have a baby in your hand, in your arms? Oh, Garrett upgraded. Wow. 15 seconds. Nessa upgraded as well. All right. All right, Heather, congratulations. You are the winner of this amazing, difficult gym kit this morning. So thank you for playing along, everyone. All right. And that is it for my presentation. I'll leave the rest of the time open to questions. Any questions? Any thoughts about using Hyperdocs for adults?
Yeah, this was really fantastic. I have some homework. I haven't heard of this before, and I feel like I've missed I've missed out a little bit. So I love the links you included. So that's a great starting kit.
Great. That's what it's all about, right? Being exposed to new things and making it work for your own instruction. You're welcome, Vanessa or Nessa. Any other questions? Let's see. All right. Yeah, exactly. This is definitely helpful. One thing to think about for the fall with us like nobody knows what that will look like. Hyperdocs are great because you can design them to be great digital lessons for asynchronous. But if you are going to be face-to-face, you can also utilize them almost as effectively in the classroom as well, even for adults and at the college level. If you have them working on it while you meet with students or do conferencing or however that might look for your own needs, it's definitely, again, if designed correctly, can support the hybrid classroom. Any other questions, thoughts? Anybody want to share a funny story, a joke maybe? All right, so you have 2 fully online and 1 hybrid. I hope it stays hybrid. Our college has been prepping people for online for a couple of years now, and now they want as many classes to be online, or excuse me, in class as possible to really pull the students, support them. I think everyone needs that interpersonal connection, or at least that's what we're looking for after this isolation. So we'll see how that runs.
Stephanie, how vital would you say having Google at your school is for running Hyperdocs? Or could you do it with alternative?
Oh, you could do it with any platform. I use Google Classroom as well because I teach teachers. So a lot of our K-12 districts around us are using Google. So I use this to model. But you could do it with any Microsoft Pages if you need to.
Yeah.
PowerPoint, I mean, any of them can work just as well. And I've only, I showed you docs and slide decks, but when you go exploring, you'll see there's plenty of other platforms. You can make a Hyperdoc with a website. You can do it with Wakelet or one of the other like Padlets. There's plenty of options for using it outside of Google, of course. Does that answer your question, Garrett?
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Great. So Heather, I see your question. What do new users find? So when I have my students design one, the biggest challenge for them is truly moving it from kind of an online, either multimedia text set or worksheet into having interaction and creation and application. That's really the biggest challenge that my students, both pre-service and in-service teachers, and even faculty I work with, that's really the big piece that really moves it to that hyper piece. So that's just one thing to keep in mind, whether you're designing it for yourself or helping others to design. It's really making sure there's that true digital application, student-centered. Offering choice is a big piece with that as well. So those are a lot of things to think about. Heather. Other questions? other thoughts or ideas of Hyperdocs? And you have my email. Honestly, if you go and design one for the fall and you want to send it to me, I'm more than willing to look it over and provide feedback. Um, I I think we all learn together. So please feel free to keep my email, or you'll have this slide deck. So feel free to keep that and email me at any time with other questions.
Dynamite. Well, thanks so much, Stephanie. This was just fantastic.
You're
I'm gonna
welcome.
drop in the chat box a link again to your slideshow, and then also a link for everybody else for the feedback form, and it has the session ID there.
Okay,
And we're gonna make the recording and the transcript available here at the end of the day, so people can view these again.
great. So Garrett, that link is for the Pear Deck.
Okay.
But do all of the participants have access? They have access to the spreadsheet, correct?
Yeah, let me drop that link in here as
Okay,
well.
I can do it too if not, but I was going to say that's where they'll be able to make their own copy and take that out. You're welcome, Maggie. Thank you for joining.